Rylan Vex knew two things for certain. One, the Jovian gas mining platform smelled like an armpit after a 2-week bender. And two, the universe had a personal vendetta against him. As he crouched under the bowels of the engine room, cursing at a wrench that seemed determined to escape his grasp, he was reminded yet again why he'd chosen engineering over interstellar diplomacy. Machines might break, but at least they didn't lie about it. "Damn it, Vex," he muttered to himself, the wrench slipping once more. "If you drop this one more time, you're gonna make it into the worst engineers of the Cosmos Club, and those guys can't even fix a toaster." His personal pep talk was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, each one echoing with the grace of a hippo in high heels. Dr. Mira Zane, the station's resident geneticist, poked her head in, a tablet clutched in her hand like it was the last chocolate bar in the galaxy. Her short hair stood up in spikes that seemed to defy the general principles of physics, much like her sanity. "Rylan," she said, her voice a mix between exasperation and morbid curiosity, "you do realize you look like a man wrestling an octopus, right?" "It's called multitasking, Mira," Rylan replied, finally tightening the last bolt. "And you're no better. I heard you talking to your lab rats last night." "Those are genetic samples, not rats," she corrected, stepping over a tangle of wires with the grace of someone who's done this dance 1,000 times. "And they deserve conversation. More than you, at least." "You wound me," Rylan said, hand over heart, before wiping his greasy fingers on a rag that was probably cleaner than any other part of the station. "What brings you down to the pit then? Besides a desperate need for my wit." Mira flashed the tablet like it was a winning lottery ticket. "This," she said, her tone suddenly more serious than a solar flare. "You need to see this." Rylan took the tablet, frowning as he scanned the data. A series of ominous blips danced across the screen, their trajectories converging on a single point, right on top of their heads. "Tell me these aren't what I think they are," Rylan said, his voice somewhere between hopeful and horrified. "If you're thinking unexpected birthday presents from a cousin you don't like, then no," Mira replied, her sarcasm carrying the weight of 1,000 bad decisions. "Those are ships, Rylan. Alien ships." Rylan's stomach churned. He'd have preferred a drill through the foot. "The Vyark, right? I thought they were just a boogaman story the military told newbies to make him piss their pants." Mira shook her head, her expression grim. "They're real, all right, and they want our gas." "Well, isn't that just peachy?" Rylan said, eyes glued to the cold, hard facts on the tablet. "How long until they arrive?" Mira tapped a few buttons, her brow furrowing deeper. "2 hours if the data's right." "2 hours," Rylan repeated, leaning back against the bulkhead with the sneaking suspicion it wouldn't hold his weight much longer. "I've waited longer for a space latte." "Guessing we'll need more than caffeine this time," Mira said, her voice tinged with a kind of resigned humor. Rylan handed the tablet back, taking a moment to process the information. Potential annihilation by an alien fleet had not been on his to-do list today. Right under fix the secondary coolant line and avoid Mira's experiments. "What's the plan?" he asked, feeling the weight of the situation settle in like an overbearing aunt at a dinner party. "We improvise," Mira replied, her smile a thin line that barely concealed her nerves. "And pray they are as dumb as they look in the vids." "Improvise," Rylan echoed, already thinking through the options or lack thereof. "Never thought I'd miss paperwork." As they made their way to the control room, Rylan couldn't help but notice the station's usual hum was missing. In its place was a tense, expectant silence, like the universe holding its breath. Not a good sign. The control room was a marvel of outdated tech, all flickering screens and buttons that seemed to have migrated from a museum display. It was a miracle the damn thing still worked. "We need to warn Earth," Mira said, her fingers flying over the console with the precision of a surgeon on a caffeine high. "They're gonna want to know about this." "Right," Rylan said, grabbing the comms. "Assuming we can get through the static and they haven't blocked our calls after that last incident." "That was one time," Mira shot back, her irritation palpable. "And it wasn't me who set the alarm off." Rylan smirked, pressing the transmit button. "This is Rylan Vex, engineer extraordinaire, calling from the Jovian mining platform. We have an issue." "Scratch that, a big damn issue." The response was a garbled mess of static and bureaucratic droning, the kind that made you want to stick a fork in your ear. "It's like talking to a brick wall," Rylan said, resisting the urge to throw the headset. "Except the wall might actually listen." "Keep trying," Mira urged, her focus split between the screens and the mess of wires she was untangling. "We need backup, and a whole lot of it." The seconds ticked by, each one a reminder of how utterly screwed they were. Ryland's fingers drummed against the console, the rhythm a poor substitute for the calm he desperately needed. "Why did I leave Mars?" he wondered aloud, the question rhetorical but laced with regret. "Because you were bored," Mira answered, not missing a beat. "And because you're an idiot." "Right," Rylan agreed, chuckling despite himself. "Boredom the root of all cosmic calamities. And idiocy," Mira added with a wink. "Never forget the idiocy." Just then a light on the console blinked. It was the proximity alert, a cheerful ding that somehow felt like a death knell. "Incoming," Rylan said, the words heavy with implication. "We should get ready." Mira nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Ready as we'll ever be." She reached for a lever that controlled the station's barely legal defense systems, the kind of under-the-table modifications that could get you court-martialed. "I feel like we're in one of those old horror stories," Rylan mused, taking his place beside her. "You know, where everyone dies at the end because they forgot to turn on the lights." "Except we're the ones in the dark," Mira replied, her hand hovering over the switch, "and about to get a hell of a wake-up call." Rylan couldn't argue with that logic, grim though it was. "Here's to hoping they brought cake," he said, offering Mira a lopsided grin. "Cake or a plasma bomb," Mira replied, her own smile tinged with the kind of gallows humor that had become their unofficial anthem. The console beeped again, a bright red warning that screamed imminent impact. Rylan took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline kick in. He'd always hated this part, the unbearable tension before all hell broke loose. "On three," Mira said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "1, 2, 3. They shouted together, Mira slamming the lever down. The station shuddered as the defenses roared to life, a cacophony of rattles and hums that could only come from a system held together by duct tape and good intentions. Somewhere in the chaos, Rylan thought he heard the faint laughter of the universe, mocking them from a safe distance. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, eyes trained on the screen as it filled with the looming shapes of the Vyark fleet. The first ship cut through the void, sleek and deadly as a shark in a kiddie pool. Ryland's heart sank as he realized just how outmatched they were. For all their bravado, the reality was as grim as it got. "We're so screwed," Mira said, her knuckles white on the console. "Yeah," Rylan agreed, a laugh bubbling up despite the odds. "But at least we'll go out in style." As the alien ships descended, the universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for that first, inevitable clash. Rylan braced himself, knowing their chances were slim but determined to make every second count. "Let's give him hell," he said, his voice filled with a reckless kind of hope. Mira nodded, her eyes locked on the approaching fleet. "For what it's worth, Rylan," she said, "I'm glad you're here." "Likewise," Rylan replied, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over him. "Let's make them remember us." And with that, the battle began. The initial blast of static from the comms system sounded like a grumpy cat trapped in a washing machine. Rylan took a deep breath, suppressing the urge to slam his fist into the console. It was too much of an antique to survive his frustration, and he figured they'd need it for at least another 5 minutes. "Attention, gas miners," a deep, disembodied voice crackled through like someone gargling gravel. "This is Commander Hroth of the Vyark Empire. Your extraction is our property. Surrender or face obliteration." Mira snorted, her eyes rolling so hard they might have seen the back of her skull. "Obliteration? How original. I guess they don't teach creative threats at alien school." Rylan leaned into the mic, adopting the kind of tone you'd use at a particularly tedious family reunion. "Commander Hroth, was it? Look, we're kinda busy here avoiding an existential crisis, so if you could just wait your turn, that'd be great." The line went silent, then Hroth's voice snarled back, patience frayed already. "You have one IOR." "An IOR," Mira mused as she tinkered with the defense controls, a bundle of wires that looked more like a kid's failed science project than a sophisticated security system. "That's generous. Almost enough time to reconsider all my life choices." "An IOR to pull a miracle out of a hat," Rylan added, flashing a smile that was more grimace than grin. "Or, just pray our little defenses here can handle whatever they're packing." The rest of the crew trickled in, grumbling like a herd of awakened bears. Most looked like they'd just crawled out of a pile of dirty laundry, which, knowing the state of their quarters, wasn't too far off. "Listen up," Rylan called out, clapping his hands together to grab their attention. "We've got some guests, and they're not here for the ambience. Apparently, aliens have gotten wind of our little slice of paradise and have some strong opinions on our gas. Do they want to complain about the smell?" piped up Jax, a scruffy technician with an eternal 5 o'clock shadow. "I've been meaning to file a complaint myself." Mira cut in before Rylan could respond. "They want everything. And if we don't give it to them, they plan on leaving us as floating space debris." "Thoughts?" The room erupted in mutters and grumbles, a chorus of half-hearted defiance mixed with a healthy dose of fear. Rylan could see the crew was split right down the middle. Some were ready to fight, others looked like they'd prefer to call it a day and hit the escape pods. "We can take him," said Bayan, a hulk of a man who looked like he wrestled asteroids in his spare time. "I didn't sign up to be a pushover." "And I didn't sign up to be vaporized," countered Tina, a wiry woman who could fix just about anything with a roll of duct tape and a prayer. "Maybe we let them have the gas and live to gripe another day." Rylan raised his hands, calling for calm like a teacher in a classroom full of hyperactive kids. "Look, both points are valid, but we're also stuck here, so either way we need a plan." Mira stepped forward, her presence commanding attention despite her small stature. "We've rigged the station with a few surprises. They might not expect us to fight back with anything more than harsh language." "Surprises?" Jax quirked an eyebrow, leaning against a console. "Like what? Pie in the face?" "More like a plasma burst in the face," Mira replied, her grin wicked. "Assuming it doesn't explode on us first." Rylan nodded, feeling the weight of the decision press down on him like an over-enthusiastic sumo wrestler. "We can't just roll over, but we need to be smart about this. If we can hold them off, maybe we can get a message to Earth that isn't just static and bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo. Or at least buy some time for backup," Mira added, her optimism thin but present. The crew began to prep, Rylan joining in with the grim determination of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. The consoles flickered to life under their hands, humming with a kind of reluctant energy. "Here goes nothing." As they worked, the Vyark ships loomed ever closer, their sleek, predatory forms casting ominous shadows across the platform. Rylan couldn't help but admire the design in a sort of detached, this-is-going-to-end-badly way. "Think they're compensating for something?" Rylan asked, trying to inject some levity into the mounting tension. Mira shrugged, her eyes never leaving the display. "Probably. Why else make your ships look like they are auditioning for a role in a space opera?" Their banter was cut short by the blaring proximity alarm. The first Vyark ship was within range, its weapon systems lighting up the radar like an overly enthusiastic Christmas tree. "Positions," Mira barked, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. The crew scrambled, falling into place with the practiced ease of those who'd faced impending doom before. Maybe not quite like this, but close enough. The station's crude, cobbled-together defenses engaged, spewing a volley of energy bolts toward the incoming vessel. The shots were wild, erratic, and yet somehow satisfying in their reckless abandon. "Take that, you overgrown toasters," Bayan muttered, his hands deftly adjusting their aim. The Vyark ship responded in kind, its advanced weaponry slicing through the station's shields like wet tissue paper. Rylan ducked as a console exploded beside him, showering the room with sparks and the distinct smell of burnt circuitry. "Guess they don't like surprises," Rylan quipped, desperately trying to reroute power from the frying systems. "Who does?" Mira replied, her focus absolute as she kept the defense systems firing. The station shuddered under the assault, the very walls groaning with the effort of holding together. "This is Commander H. Shroth," the voice crackled over the comms again, indignant and sharp. "You test our patience. Surrender now and we might spare your lives." Rylan grabbed the mic, his voice a mix of defiance and desperation. "Sorry, Commander, but we're fresh out of white flags. You'd think a mighty empire would have better things to do than pick on a bunch of minors." The reply was silence, more ominous than any threat. The Vyark ships formed up, preparing for what would likely be the final assault. Rylan could feel the hope slipping through his fingers like sand. "Any last words, Vex?" Mira asked, her tone light even in the face of annihilation. Rylan looked around at his crew, at the station he'd begrudgingly come to call home. "Yeah," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Let's hope they remember us as the idiots who dared." With that, the Vyark ships unleashed their full fury. The station rocked under the barrage, systems failing one by one. The crew held fast, fighting against the odds with a grim resolve that bordered on lunacy. Through the chaos, Rylan clung to that sliver of hope, that maybe, just maybe, they'd make it through the day, or at least take a few of those Vyark bastards with them. As the battle raged on, the station's defenses sputtering their last, Rylan and Mira shared a glance, understanding passing between them without a word. It was a moment of solidarity, of shared madness, a testament to their stubborn refusal to go quietly. And so they fought with everything they had and then some, because when faced with certain doom, what else was there to do but laugh in its face and give it hell? The station shook again, this time with the sort of violent enthusiasm usually reserved for drunk uncles at weddings. Rylan tried to keep his balance, one hand clinging to a console while the other held onto a half-eaten protein bar. A guy had to keep up his strength in the face of impending doom, after all. "All right, folks," Rylan said, his voice barely audible over the wailing alarms. "New plan. We're gonna use the genetic labs to whip up some kind of biological defense. Because why not? We've already tried everything else short of throwing rocks." Mira arched an eyebrow, her expression hovering somewhere between skeptical and amused. "You mean those labs with the ancient equipment that's one power surge away from becoming a museum exhibit?" "Exactly," Rylan replied, taking a bite of his protein bar. "It's either that or taking up interpretive dance as a defense strategy. Honestly, I'd pay to see that," Jax chimed in, fiddling with a console that sparked in protest. "But let's go with Rylan's idea. Sounds slightly less suicidal." Rylan nodded, swallowing down the last of his snack. "All right, team. Let's genetically Frankenstein ourselves out of this mess." The crew stumbled through the flickering corridors, the station groaning like it was auditioning for a horror film. Rylan tried to ignore the ominous creaks and pops overhead. Nothing like a little structural instability to keep things interesting. The genetic labs weren't much to look at, but then, neither was Rylan on a good day. The equipment hummed with a kind of reluctant life, and the smell of chemicals filled the air, a welcome change from the usual ode to sweaty miner. "Okay, Mira," Rylan said, gesturing to the tangled mess of wires and screens. "You're the genetic genius. How do we turn this into something that'll make the Vyarks regret ever being born?" Mira ran a hand through her spiky hair, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "We could engineer a bioagent that targets their systems, something that adapts and screws with their tech." "Sounds good," Rylan replied, nodding along. "And if it doesn't work, at least we'll go down as the idiots who tried to outsmart an empire with science." Bayan grunted from the corner, where he was attempting to assemble something that looked vaguely weapon-like. And if it does work, we'll be the craziest heroes this side of Jupiter. Or the craziest idiots, Tina added, clearly hedging her bets on the latter. Mira got to work, her fingers flying over the tablet like a pianist on a caffeine bender. Rylan stood by, trying to look helpful and failing spectacularly. He was an engineer, not a geneticist, but desperation had a funny way of making you try new things. I'm borrowing some sequences from the flora in the gas reserves, Mira said, not looking up from her work. We can tweak their adaptive genes to mess with the Vyerk systems. Flora? Jax asked, peering over her shoulder. You mean those weird plants that look like they're plotting world domination? Exactly, Mira replied, her eyes glinting with a mix of excitement and madness. We've been studying their resilience. It's about time we put it to good use. As Mira worked, Rylan tried to keep the rest of the crew from tearing each other apart. Tensions were running high, and panic was as contagious as the common cold. Guys, Rylan said, raising his voice to be heard over the arguing. Bayan and Tina were glaring at each other like two cats in a very small cage. Focus, all right. Either we pull this off, or we start practicing our Vyerk surrender speech. Tina crossed her arms, her glare losing none of its intensity. I just don't want to die because someone trips over a wire and accidentally vaporizes us. Relax, Bayan replied, waving a dismissive hand. I'm more likely to vaporize the Vyerks. Promise. Touching, Rylan said, rolling his eyes. Now can we save the bickering for after we're not about to be space dust? The crew got to work, the lab filled with the sound of frantic activity and more than a few colorful expletives. Rylan moved from station to station, offering advice or a steady hand where needed. It was chaotic, but it was progress. Of course, things couldn't just go smoothly. Where would the fun be in that? In the middle of their frantic preparations, a console erupted in a shower of sparks, the screen blinking out with a finality that was both dramatic and inconvenient. Great, Jax muttered, kicking the now useless hunk of metal. Just what we needed. Sabotage. Sabotage? Rylan echoed, a sinking feeling settling in his stomach like a lead weight. What makes you think that? Because, Jax replied, pointing at the wires, someone's been messing with the systems, and unless it was one of us sleepwalking, we've got a problem. Rylan felt his irritation spike, his patience wearing thinner than a cheap space blanket. Just when things were going so well, Mira frowned, her focus momentarily diverted from her genetic wizardry. So someone's trying to make sure we don't get out of this alive. Seems that way, Rylan replied, clenching his fists. Guess not everyone's a fan of our survival plan. Who'd be stupid enough to sabotage their own station? Bayan asked, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. Someone who thinks surrendering is a better option, Tina said, her voice cold. Or someone who's got other plans. The thought was unsettling, like finding out your spaceship had a roach problem. Rylan scanned the faces of his crew, trying to spot any signs of guilt or treachery. But all he saw was a bunch of stressed, scared people doing their best to keep it together. Fix it, Rylan said, gesturing to the smoking console. We can't afford any more surprises. On it, Jax replied, with the weary enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Keep an eye out, Rylan added, addressing the rest of the crew. We can't let whoever's doing this slow us down. With the sabotage threat hanging over them like a particularly unwelcome cloud, the crew redoubled their efforts. Rylan and Mira worked side by side, their initial banter replaced by a grim determination. There was no time to waste on second-guessing or doubt. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like a tiny eternity. Rylan's nerves were stretched thinner than the station's shields, and the constant hum of the labs did nothing to soothe the anxiety gnawing at his insides. Finally, Mira stepped back from her console, wiping a sheen of sweat from her forehead. I think we've got something, an adaptive enzyme that should disrupt their systems. Should? Rylan asked, raising an eyebrow. Nothing's guaranteed when you're trying to outsmart an alien empire with plant DNA, Mira replied, her smile sardonic. But it's better than nothing. All right, Rylan said, clapping his hands together. Let's get this thing distributed through the station systems. The Vyerks won't know what hit him. The crew worked in concert, each task a cog in the hastily assembled machine that was their last-ditch defense. There was a sense of unity, a shared understanding that their survival depended on this mad gamble paying off. As the enzyme was fed into the station systems, Ryland felt a flicker of something that might have been hope, an emotion he was still trying to recognize amidst the sea of sarcasm and cynicism. "Here goes nothing," Mira said, her fingers hovering over the final command. "Let's make history," Ryland replied, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. Mira hit the button, and the lab was filled with a low hum as the enzyme spread through the station's systems. It was a moment of tense anticipation, like waiting for a punchline to a very dark joke. "Now we wait," Ryland said, leaning back against a console. "And pray that whoever sabotaged us doesn't have any more tricks up their sleeve." The station seemed to hold its breath, the usual hum of machinery and distant explosions replaced by an expectant silence. It was the calm before the storm, the lull before the universe decided whether or not they'd live to see another dawn. Rylan exchanged a glance with Mira, both of them acutely aware of the precariousness of their situation. They'd done everything they could, and now it was a matter of waiting for the Vyerks to make their move. As the minutes dragged on, the tension in the room became almost palpable, like a thick fog settling over their shoulders. Rylan couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of a precipice, teetering on the brink of something monumental and unknown. "Rylan," Jax called from across the room, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "We've got movement on the sensors. They're regrouping." "Good," Rylan replied, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Let's see how they like our little surprise party." The crew braced themselves as the Vyerk ships began their approach, their sleek forms visible on the monitors. It was a sight that would have sent most sensible people running for cover, but Rylan and his crew weren't exactly known for their sensibility. As the Vyerks closed in, the station came to life, the adaptive enzyme working its magic in the background. Rylan watched as the Vyerk ships faltered, their systems glitching and stuttering like a bad transmission. "It's working," Mira whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief and triumph. "Damn right it is," Rylan replied, his voice filled with a mix of relief and exhilaration. "Now let's give him hell." The station's defenses roared to life, firing on the disoriented Vyerk ships with a ferocity born of desperation and defiance. It was a beautiful sight, in a grim, apocalyptic sort of way. As the battle raged on, Rylan felt a surge of pride for his ragtag crew, their ingenuity and resilience shining through even in the darkest of times. They were battered and bruised, outnumbered and outgunned, but they refused to back down. And for that, Rylan thought they might just survive this after all. The Vyerk ships regrouped, no doubt furious at being bested by a bunch of misfit miners and a geneticist with a caffeine addiction. Rylan watched the monitors with a smug satisfaction, a rare but welcome feeling amid the chaos. "Looks like they're not taking the hint," Jax muttered, hunched over the controls like a disgruntled gargoyle. "Persistent buggers," Rylan agreed, shaking his head. "You'd think they'd get tired of being humiliated by now." As if on cue, the Vyerk ships launched a full assault. The station shook violently, lights flickering as power conduits strained under the onslaught. It was like being inside a giant, angry washing machine set to obliterate. Bayan staggered, clutching a rail for support. "Remind me again why we didn't just surrender." "Because then we'd miss out on all this fun," Rylan replied, bracing himself against a console, the comforting hum of machinery now a cacophony of alarms and warnings. "Fun," Bayan snorted, as a panel behind him exploded with a shower of sparks. "You're a real party planner, Vex." Mira was already scanning through the data, her eyes darting across the tablet's screen. "We need a new plan," she said, her voice cutting through the din like a well-sharpened scalpel. "The enzymes only bought us a little time." "Great," Tina grumbled. Back to square one. Maybe we can start an interpretive dance troupe next. Tempting, Rylan replied, but I don't think the Vyerks appreciate the arts. Mira sighed, a sound that conveyed more exhaustion than words ever could. I've been analyzing the data we've gathered from their ships. Their genetic makeup has a unique vulnerability, something that might give us an edge. Vulnerable how? Jax asked, his curiosity piqued despite the imminent doom. They rely heavily on a specific protein for neural functions, Mira explained, swiping through data with the finesse of a conductor. If we can disrupt that, we might incapacitate them long enough to escape. Hold up, Rylan interjected, raising a skeptical brow. You're talking about messing with their brains. In a manner of speaking, Mira replied, a wry smile playing on her lips. It's risky and untested. But desperate times call for desperate insanity. Bayan frowned, clearly not thrilled about being part of a potentially fatal science experiment. And what's Plan B if this doesn't work? Plan B is hoping they are allergic to irony, Ryland said with a shrug. We don't have many options. The station groaned, metal straining against the assault like a grocer's cheap plastic bag filled with rocks. Ryland felt the familiar weight of resignation settle on his shoulders. It was a feeling he knew all too well, the awareness that the universe was about to remind him just how small he was in the grand scheme of things. All right, Ryland said, clapping his hands to pull everyone's focus. Let's hear it, Mira. How do we make this happen without turning us into space debris? The station's systems can distribute a modified enzyme, Mira explained, her fingers still racing over the tablet. But I'll need access to the mainframe and about a half IOR to make the necessary adjustments. Half an IOR, Jax said, incredulous. We barely have half a minute with the way things are going. Then we'd better get moving, Rylan replied, cutting off further debate. Jax, Bayan, get to the mainframe and start the prep. Tina, see what you can do about keeping us in one piece. And what about you, fearless leader? Bayan asked, already shouldering his toolkit. I'm going with Mira, Rylan said, meeting her gaze. If something goes wrong, she'll need backup. Or someone to blame, Mira added, the corners of her mouth twitching upward. Let's get to it then. They moved through the station, the corridors echoing with the sounds of distant explosions and the omnipresent hum of machinery straining under the pressure. Rylan couldn't help but make a cynical observation about the state of their lives as they hurried along. Isn't it comforting, he said, knowing our survival depends on technology older than our grandparents? Comforting as a knife in the back, Mira replied, her tone drier than desert sand. They reached the mainframe room, a haven of blinking lights and tangled wires. It was a mess, but it was their mess, and Rylan had long since learned to function in chaos. All right, Mira said, setting up shop at the main console. I'll need you to monitor the enzyme distribution while I make the adjustments. Rylan took his place beside her, eyes scanning the controls. Let's hope this works, he said, trying to keep the doubt from his voice. It will, Mira replied, her confidence a small but stubborn flame in the face of everything. It has to. They worked in tandem, Rylan following Mira's instructions with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The air was thick with tension, each passing second a reminder that their time was running out. How's it looking, Jax? Rylan asked over the comm system, his voice crackling through the static. We're almost there, Jax replied, the sound of clattering tools echoing in the background. Bayan swearing like a sailor on shore leave, so we must be making progress. Lovely, Rylan said, rolling his eyes. Keep it up. Minutes passed in a blur of frantic activity, Rylan and Mira racing against the clock as the station shuddered around them. The Vyerk assault intensified, each hit a reminder that they were hanging by the thinnest of threads. Almost there, Mira said, her fingers flying over the controls. Just a bit more. The room rocked violently, a blast hitting so close that Rylan could feel the heat through the walls. Alarms blared, the station protesting the abuse with every fiber of its mechanical being. Rylan, Jax's voice cracked over the comms, urgency in every syllable. We've got a breach. Hull integrity's failing in sections 3 and 4. Seal it off, Rylan barked, adrenaline surging through him. Divert power to the shields if you have to. On it, Jax replied, the line cutting off with a burst of static. Rylan, Mira said, her voice suddenly calm and steady. It's ready. He met her gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. This was it, their Hail Mary, their last shot at pulling off a miracle. Do it, he said, the words carrying the weight of 1,000 fears and a single, stubborn hope. Mira entered the final command, the console lighting up as the enzyme began its journey through the station's systems. It was a gamble, a wild leap into the unknown, but it was all they had. The station shuddered again, a deep, resonant groan that seemed to echo through the very bones of the structure. Rylan held his breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. And then slowly, the assaults began to subside. The Vyark ships faltered, their attacks losing precision as their systems struggled against the genetic disruption. Mira, Rylan said, barely daring to believe it. I think it's working. Don't jinx it, Mira warned, though the relief in her voice was clear. As the Vyark ships faltered, Rylan felt a surge of exhilaration. Against all odds, they'd managed to turn the tide, even if only for a moment. Keep on them, Rylan said over the comms, the command infused with a newfound determination. We're not out of this yet. The crew rallied, the station's defenses coming to life once more. It was a desperate, chaotic scramble, but it was theirs, and they weren't about to give up. Back in the mainframe room, Rylan turned to Mira, a mixture of disbelief and gratitude in his eyes. You did it, he said, the words a rare, genuine compliment from a man who lived on sarcasm. We did it, Mira corrected, a small smile breaking through the tension. But we need to hold them off long enough to make our escape. Right, Rylan said, nodding. Let's get back to the others and see this through. The journey back to the main control room was a blur, the station still shaking but holding together by sheer stubbornness and duct tape. Rylan couldn't help but make a cynical comment as they moved. If we survive this, remind me to never volunteer for anything involving genetics or empires ever again. I'll put it on your calendar, Mira quipped, her smile a brief flicker of light in the gloom. Reaching the control room, they found Jax and Bian in the middle of a heated debate over power distribution, Tina frantically working to patch up the hull breaches. Glad you could join us, Jax said, not looking up from his work. We were just discussing whether we should run for the escape pods or go down in a blaze of glory. How about neither? Rylan suggested, moving to take his place at the controls. Let's get this over with. The Vyark ships continued to struggle, their systems still reeling from the enzyme's effects. It was a window of opportunity, one they couldn't afford to waste. Bian, Rylan called, eyes on the monitor. Can we boost our engines enough to get out of range? Maybe, if we reroute everything, Bian replied, his tone skeptical but hopeful. But it's a one-way trip. We'll burn out the engines. Better than staying here, Tina said, her voice firm despite the odds. Let's do it. With no time to lose, the crew set to work, their actions a synchronized dance of desperation and determination. Every movement, every decision a step toward their slim chance at survival. Rylan monitored the controls, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and contingencies. The odds were against them, but that had never stopped him before, and it wasn't about to now. All right, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. On my mark, we punch it and pray we don't end up as cosmic spaghetti. Sounds like a plan, Jax replied, his grin a flash of teeth amidst the tension. Ready, Bian confirmed, his hands steady on the controls despite the stakes. Then here we go, Rylan said, taking a calming breath. 3, 2, 1. He hit the command, the engines roaring to life with a surge of power that thrummed through the station. It was a gamble, a mad dash for freedom, but it was their only shot. The station lurched forward, the stars blurring into streaks of light as they broke free of the Vyark ship's grasp. It was an exhilarating, terrifying moment, the sensation of speed and danger a heady mix. They raced through the void, the engines straining, the Vyark ships gradually falling behind as their systems continued to falter. We're clear, Mira said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and relief. We actually did it. Don't sound so surprised, Rylan replied, though his grin was just as wide as hers. Now let's get the hell out of here. As they sped away from the battlefield, the reality of their situation began to set in. They'd survived against all odds, turned the tables on an empire, and come out the other side with their lives. It was a victory, small and hard one, but a victory nonetheless. Rylan looked around at his crew, their exhaustion evident but their spirits unbroken. They'd done the impossible, and for that he was grateful. "Well," he said, breaking the silence, "who's up for a drink?" "Only if you're buying," Bayan replied, a grin spreading across his face. "Deal," Rylan said, feeling a rare sense of camaraderie and accomplishment. "Next stop, anywhere but here." The station continued its relentless shuddering, like an ancient beast caught in the throes of death, each tremor a testament to the precariousness of their situation. Rylan Vex, engineer by trade and cynic by nature, tightened his grip on the console. The sensation was similar to cradling an old friend who might stab you in the back at any moment. At least machinery was consistent in its betrayal. "Buy-in," Rylan shouted over the commotion. "Status report, preferably one that won't make me want to jump out of an airlock." Buy-in's voice crackled through the static-laden comms, thick with exasperation. "I've got good news and bad news. Good news, we're still breathing. Bad news, might not be for much longer if we can't get more power to the shields." "Ain't breathing overrated anyway," Rylan muttered, mostly to himself, though he suspected the station's walls were eavesdropping. "All right, let's see what we can do about that." Mira, working beside him, barely looked up from the tablet she was furiously swiping through. "You'd think a multi-billion credit space station would come with a decent warranty," Rylan snorted. "Clearly, we missed the extended service plan option." The corridor outside the mainframe room echoed with the chaotic symphony of footsteps and panicked chatter, the crew's disheveled forms weaving in and out like ants scurrying from a disturbed nest. Rylan watched them for a moment, knowing that beneath the veneer of sardonic humor lay a very real fear. Not that he'd admit it. Fear was best served with a side of sarcasm. "Hey, Jax," Rylan called, turning his attention back to the console. "How's our favorite antiquated defense system holding up?" Jax's response was both immediate and drenched in frustration. "It's about as reliable as a promise from a politician. We can keep diverting power, but it's only buying us time." "Fine, let's keep playing musical chairs with the station's power," Rylan said. "Who knows? Maybe the Vyark will get bored and go home." Mira shot him a look, one part exasperation, two parts amusement. "Always the optimist, aren't you?" "Someone has to be," Rylan quipped, though his smile waned as he turned back to his work. The station groaned again, a sound that resonated deep in Rylan's bones. Each assault from the Vyark ship stripped away another layer of hope, leaving behind the raw nerves of desperation. If they couldn't maintain the station's integrity much longer, they'd have to consider other options. Options like finding out firsthand if space was colder than a Vyark's heart. "Rylan," Mira's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts, bringing him back to the present. "We've got something here. The enzyme's affecting their neural systems, but we need a diversion, a big one if we're going to make a run for it." Rylan nodded, his mind already racing through possibilities. "A diversion, huh? How about a grand finale with fireworks?" "I was thinking more along the lines of a controlled explosion in the gas vents," Mira suggested, her tone matter-of-fact as though discussing the weather. Rylan laughed, a sharp bark that held no humor. "Controlled explosions. Sure, what could possibly go wrong with that plan?" "Everything," Mira replied, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "But if we're going out, might as well go out with a bang." "All right," Rylan said, resigning himself to the lunacy of the situation. "Let's do it. Get the others ready. If we're going to survive this, it'll be as the universe intends, by sheer dumb luck." The crew gathered in the main control room, a ragtag ensemble of weary faces and frayed nerves. Rylan surveyed them, a strange sense of camaraderie swelling within him. They were in this mess together, and he'd be damned if they didn't at least go down swinging. "All right, folks," Ryland said, addressing the group. "We've got a plan, a terrible one, but it's ours. We're going to make a break for it, and we're going to need everyone's help." Bayan arched an eyebrow. "You mean we actually have a plan this time?" "Miracles happen," Ryland shot back. "Mira's cooked up something that's messing with the Vyerk's jelly brains. We're going to use that distraction to hightail it out of here." Tina crossed her arms, skepticism written all over her face. "And what about the controlled explosion? Seems like a surefire way to send us all to an early grave." "Think of it as a final act of defiance," Ryland said. "Besides, we're overdue for a win." Jax looked up from his console, his expression one of determined resignation. "Whatever's left of our system will be toast once we do this. No turning back." "Never was," Ryland replied, his voice firm. "Now let's go out there and give them hell." The plan went into motion, each crew member a cog in the precarious machine of their survival. As they worked, Ryland couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. Here they were, trying to outwit an empire with little more than outdated tech and a prayer. It was enough to make anyone laugh, if only to keep from crying. Mira, ever the pragmatist, kept a watchful eye on the enzyme's progress, her fingers dancing across the tablet with practiced ease. "The Vyerk ships are showing signs of significant system failures," she reported, her voice a rare blend of relief and tension. "If we're going to do this, it has to be now." "All right," Ryland said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unsaid fears. "Let's light this candle and see where we end up." As the station rocked with the force of the explosions, the crew braced themselves against the onslaught of noise and vibration. It was a symphony of chaos, the crescendo of their reckless gamble, and Ryland couldn't help but feel a surge of exhilaration amidst the madness. The diversion worked, drawing the Vyerk's attention away from the fleeing station. For a moment, just a brief, beautiful moment, it felt as though they might actually make it out alive. "Engines are holding," Bayan called out, his voice cutting through the din like a lifeline. "We've got a shot, but we need to push now." "Do it," Ryland ordered, his heart pounding in his chest. "And someone, please, remember to pack the drinks." The station surged forward, the engines roaring with all the fury of a cornered beast. Against all odds they were moving, the stars stretching into blurs of light as they accelerated away from the beleaguered Vyerk forces. Ryland's mind was a chaotic mix of disbelief and elation. They'd done it. They'd actually managed to outmaneuver the Empire, skirting the edge of disaster with a recklessness that bordered on insanity. "Keep it steady," Ryland said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. "We're not clear yet." The station shuddered, a final groan of protest as they broke free into open space. The Vyerk ships receded into the distance, their pursuit thwarted by the genetic disruption and the chaos they'd unleashed. Mira let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. "I can't believe that worked." "Believe it," Ryland replied, his own laughter mingling with hers. "And remind me to never ever do this again." "Deal," Mira said, her smile weary but genuine. As the station settled into a semblance of normalcy, the crew slumped into their seats, the weight of their ordeal finally catching up with them. They were exhausted, battered, and bruised, but more importantly, they were alive. Ryland looked around at his crew, their resilience a testament to the indomitable human spirit. They'd faced their darkest ire and come out the other side, not unscathed but unbroken. "All right, team," he said, his voice filled with a rare warmth. "We'll need to find a place to regroup and make repairs. Suggestions?" Bayan, ever the pragmatist, raised a hand. "How about anywhere that isn't here?" "Seconded," Jax added, a grin spreading across his face. Tina nodded, her expression softening. "I hear the Martian colonies are lovely this time of year." "Martian colonies it is," Ryland agreed, the tension finally easing from his shoulders. "And this time drinks are on me." As they set course for their next destination, Ryland allowed himself a moment of reflection. They'd survived the impossible, turned the tables on an empire, and lived to tell the tale. In a universe that seemed intent on crushing them under the weight of its indifference, they'd stood their ground and won. "Well, folks," Ryland said, leaning back in his seat, "here's to surviving another day in the universe's worst neighborhood." The crew chuckled, their laughter a balm against the scars of their recent trials. They were weary, yes, but as they sailed through the stars, they carried with them a hard-won hope. And that, Ryland mused, was worth more than all the gas in Jupiter's storms. The Jovian gas mining platform, affectionately dubbed Rust Bucket by its unfortunate crew, was clinging to life with all the grace of a drunken tortoise attempting ballet. Every panel, wire, and bolt on the creaking space station seemed to strain under the mounting pressure, like an overstretched rubber band ready to snap. "Mira, you genius," Ryland muttered, not entirely sure if it was a compliment or a curse. He glanced over his shoulder at the station's resident geneticist, whose wild hair mirrored the state of the station, frazzled and barely under control. Mira, fixated on her tablet, didn't even flinch. "If by genius you mean the kind that accidentally blows up science labs, then yes. I'm a bloody Einstein. Hey, at least you managed to whip up a brain-addling enzyme in record time," Ryland shot back, attempting to mask his anxiety with humor. "I mean, that's gotta count for something. Great, my legacy will be the woman who turned Vyark brains into scrambled eggs." Just the sort of recognition I was hoping for. The station groaned again, a metallic symphony of anguish that set Ryland's teeth on edge. He shrugged off the feeling, focusing instead on the console. It was ancient, yes, but it was their only hope of deploying Mira's concoction. Unfortunately, hope was in short supply, right next to functioning power. Jax, leaning against a nearby panel, looked like a man who'd just been told the universe was flat. "We're running out of juice faster than a starship at an intergalactic drag race. If we don't figure something out soon, we might as well start practicing our spacewalking routines." "Lovely," Ryland said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And here I thought dying of asphyxiation was our biggest concern." Bayan's voice crackled through the comms, the sound akin to static and frustration having a very loud argument. "Vex, the power conduits are about as reliable as a wet match. What's the plan?" "Use what we got," Ryland replied, hoping his confidence sounded more genuine than it felt. "This station may be held together by spit and prayers, but it's all we've got." Mira frowned at her tablet as if sheer willpower could conjure extra power out of thin air. "We need a way to distribute the enzyme across the Vyark fleet, but with our current power levels, we'd be luckier trying to light the station on fire and hope they catch the drift." "An intriguing plan B," Ryland said with a smirk. "But let's keep the bonfire party as a last resort, yeah." Tina grumbled from the corner, her expression a mixture of exasperation and resignation. "Back to square one. All that effort and we're still sitting ducks." "More like dead ducks," Jax corrected, his tone equal parts dark humor and grim reality. "Quit the pep talk, Jax," Ryland said, rolling his eyes. "You're going to make me cry." Mira glanced up, her eyes meeting Ryland's. "We could try rerouting auxiliary power from the non-essential systems. The problem is, I'm not sure we have enough time to make it count." "Non-essentials? What, like the coffee maker?" Ryland quipped, earning a chuckle from Jax. "Don't joke about that," Jax warned, deadpan. "Coffee's the only thing keeping me from turning this station into a zero-gravity bounce house." Bayan's voice cut through once again, urgency dripping from every word. "We've got about 15 minutes before the Vyark figure out we're trying to play them. We need that enzyme out there and fast." Ryland rubbed his temples, frustration simmering just beneath the surface. "Okay, let's get creative. We need a way to juice this thing up for long enough to make a difference." Jack straightened, a spark of mischief in his eye. "What if we rig the defense controls to overload? Might give us just enough power for a quick burst." "Risky," Mira said thoughtfully, "but it might work. Just enough to distribute the enzyme and give those Vyarks a nice migraine." "Or it could blow us all to hell," Tina interjected, her voice tinged with sarcasm. "But hey, live fast, die spectacularly, right? With a nod, Rylan made the decision. Let's do it. We don't have any other option. Jax, get on it. Mira, stay on the enzyme control. Tina, see what you can do with the remaining power grid. As the crew scrambled into action, the tension in the room was palpable, a living, breathing entity that wound itself around each of them. But beneath the chaos, there was something else, an undeniable sense of unity that linked them together, even as the station threatened to tear itself apart. All systems ready, Jax called out, his fingers flying over the console with the precision of a man who'd made peace with his fate. Rylan took a deep breath, a calm settling over him despite the impending storm. All right, let's light it up. The station groaned once more, a sound that vibrated through Rylan's bones as the defense controls surged, the last desperate gamble of an outmatched crew. The lights flickered, dimming to a ghostly glow as the power redistribution began. Mira's fingers danced across her tablet, her focus unwavering. Enzyme deployment in 3, 2, 1. A pulse of energy surged through the station, a brief, brilliant light that flickered across the void, carrying with it the fruits of their labor, a biological agent designed to exploit the Vyerk's unique neural vulnerability. And for a moment, just a moment, everything seemed to hold its breath. The comms crackled again, Bayon's voice coming through with a note of strained hope. It's working. Their ships are faltering. We might actually pull this off. Rylan allowed himself a small smile, the corner of his mouth twitching upwards. Well, would you look at that? Maybe the universe doesn't hate us after all. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Mira warned, though her own relief was evident. We've still got a long way to go before we're out of this mess. True, Rylan conceded, a wry grin spreading across his face. But I'd say we've earned ourselves a victory dance. As the station continued its slow crawl through space, the crew finally allowed themselves a moment of reprieve. The tension that had gripped them for so long began to ease, replaced by the cautious optimism of survivors who'd managed to cheat death one more time. All right, Rylan said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared ordeal. We've got breathing room. Let's see if we can't figure out a way to get this hunk of junk moving again. Tina snorted, her earlier skepticism giving way to a weary smile. Just when I was getting used to the idea of being a space ghost. As charming as that sounds, I think I'll pass, Jax replied, his own grin mirroring hers. Mira set her tablet aside, her eyes meeting Rylan's with a mix of gratitude and determination. We've still got work to do, but for now, not bad, Rylan. He shrugged, feigning nonchalance despite the warmth spreading through his chest. Just another day in the universe's worst neighborhood, right? With a shared chuckle, the crew turned their attention back to the task at hand, repairing a station that seemed determined to fall apart at the seams. But in that moment, as they worked side by side, there was an unspoken understanding that whatever happened next, they'd face it together. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to come out the other side. The rust bucket's metallic bones groaned like an old man rising from a too-soft chair, sending a shiver through the already frayed nerves of its crew. Rylan Vex rubbed his neck, eyeing the flickering lights overhead like they might burst out laughing at any moment. The Jovian gas mining platform was held together by little more than duct tape and prayer, and right now, the prayer was on a coffee break. Jax, I think we've successfully turned this place into a haunted house, Rylan remarked, trying to inject some humor into a situation that was rapidly devolving into a waking nightmare. Yeah, all we need is a couple of ghosts and some ominous background music, Jax replied, his fingers dancing over the console with the familiarity of a man who's had too many late nights with too little sleep. Perhaps it'll scare the Vyerks away, Mira suggested, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She was hunched over her tablet, which was somehow still functioning despite the station's penchant for technological rebellion. Tina snorted from her corner, where she was elbow-deep in a panel that spat sparks like an angry cat. We should be so lucky. Right now, I'd settle for a working toilet. All the comforts of home minus the comfort, Rylan agreed, his gaze shifting to the flickering display. All right, folks, time to get serious. That enzyme isn't going to deploy itself. No, Mira retorted, but if it did, maybe it'd get a promotion or a medal. What do you think? Most likely to save our asses, Rylan chuckled, but the weight of the situation was like a leaden cloak draped over his shoulders. The Vyark fleet was out there, regrouping, and they had about as much time to act as it took to microwave a burrito. Not long enough and far too long all at once. Okay, Rylan said, rolling his shoulders like a prizefighter stepping into the ring. Here's the plan. We're going to reroute the auxiliary power, overload the defense controls, and hope it gives us the punch we need to deploy the enzyme. It's risky, but it's all we've got. Risky? Jax raised an eyebrow. How risky are we talking? Risky as in we might blow ourselves up. Risky as in we might save our skins, take your pick. Gee, sounds like a win-win, Tina muttered, sarcasm oozing from every syllable. Mira glanced up from her tablet, her expression equal parts determination and exhaustion. Do we have any other choice? Nope, Rylan replied, popping the P for emphasis. But if it makes you feel any better, I'm going down with you. Comforting, Mira said dryly. Let's just hope this doesn't end with us as a cautionary tale. With that, the crew snapped into action with the frenetic energy of people who knew the clock was ticking down to zero. Jax worked on the console like it was a lover spurned, coaxing it into cooperation with a mix of sweet talk and the occasional threat. Tina busied herself with the power grid, her movements efficient despite the tremors shaking the rust bucket's frame. Rylan took a deep breath and approached the main console, where hundreds of wires were tangled together like a nest of angry vipers. It was the kind of setup that would give any engineer nightmares, but right now, he had to be the one to tame it. All right, here we go, Rylan murmured to himself, hands moving with the kind of precision that belied the chaos surrounding him. Let's not blow up, let's not blow up. As he worked, the familiar hum of the station's systems grew louder, vibrating through the floor. It was a symphony of machines pushed to their limits, and the only conductor was desperation. Rylan! Mira's voice cut through the noise, sharp and urgent. We're ready on our end, just give the word. Copy that, Rylan replied, trying to ignore the adrenaline rushing through his veins like a freight train. He glanced over at Jax, who gave a thumbs up, his expression one of grim determination. Jax, are we good to go? Good. I wouldn't say good, but we're as ready as we'll ever be. That's the spirit, Rylan replied with a grimace. All right, everyone, on my mark. 3, 2, 1, now. He slammed his palm onto the console and the station shuddered in response, the lights flickering in time with Rylan's pounding heart. The overloaded defense controls whined like a banshee, and for a moment Rylan feared they'd taken things too far. But then, against all odds, the station held. The lights steadied and the energy surge was palpable, a rush of power that crackled through the air. Mira's fingers flew over her tablet, deploying the enzyme with the calm precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Enzyme deployed, she announced, her voice tinged with relief. Now we wait. Let's hope the Vyarks have a sensitivity to headaches, Jax quipped, though his expression was pinched with worry. The comms crackled to life, Bayan's voice a welcome intrusion. Their ships are faltering. Whatever you did, it's working. Ha, take that, you Vyark bastards, Tina cheered, a triumphant grin breaking through her earlier veneer of cynicism. Rylan exhaled, the tension slowly bleeding from his muscles. Looks like they underestimated the humans, again. Yeah, Mira said, a rare smile gracing her lips. Desperate measures for desperate times, right? Exactly, Rylan replied, glancing around at his crew. We're not out of the woods yet, but damn if we didn't just make one hell of a statement. You mean, don't mess with the underdogs? Jax suggested, leaning back in his chair with a self-satisfied smirk. Or maybe, never piss off a crew with nothing to lose, Tina added, her voice a blend of pride and exhaustion. The station was still a decrepit hulk of mismatched parts and questionable engineering, but in that moment, it was also a beacon of defiance in the endless void. So, what now? Mira asked, her tone lighter than it had been in days. Now, Rylan said, We figure out how to get this floating tin can back in one piece before we all end up as space junk. Ah, Jack sighed dramatically. Just when I was getting used to the idea of being a legendary hero. Sorry to spoil your fantasy, Rylan chuckled, but right now I'd settle for getting the plumbing back online. Tina snorted. You and me both. As they worked, the crew's banter wove through the constant hum of the station, a thread of humanity amid the cacophony of malfunctioning machinery. They were a motley crew, thrown together by circumstance and held together by necessity, but they were also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Buy-in, Ryland said into the comms. What's the status on the Vyerk withdrawal? Looks like they're pulling back, Buy-in replied, a note of awe in his voice. I think they finally realized that humans are at their most dangerous when they've got nothing to lose. Damn right, Mira said with a nod, her eyes bright with triumph. Never count us out. And on that note, Rylan interjected, let's get back to work, people. We've got a station to fix and a reputation to uphold. The crew groaned good-naturedly, but there was no mistaking the underlying pride in their expressions. They'd faced impossible odds, stared down the barrel of defeat, and emerged victorious, not as individuals but as a team. And as they set to work repairing the rust bucket, their banter flowed freely, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the universe, humanity's greatest strength was its capacity to laugh in the face of adversity. Hey, Rylan, Jack said, grinning as he tinkered with a stubborn circuit. Think we'll get a medal for this? Rylan smirked, shaking his head. Nah, but maybe we'll get a day off. Or at least a coffee break. I'll take it, Jax replied, his grin wide enough to light up the room. And with that, the crew of the Rust Bucket returned to their work, buoyed by the knowledge that, come what may, they'd face it together. Even in the universe's worst neighborhood, they were survivors, scrappy, sarcastic, and utterly unbreakable. With the Vyerk ships pulling back, the Jovian gas mining platform, affectionately dubbed the Rust Bucket, settled into something that might almost pass for calm, if your definition of calm was a rickety tin can in space still reeling from having the living daylights kicked out of it. Rylan Vex surveyed the wreckage, noting with a grimace how the station's interior now resembled a junkyard on a bad day. So this is what victory looks like, huh? Jax remarked, leaning against a console that crackled ominously under his weight. Looks like a trash compactor had a nervous breakdown. Yeah, Rylan replied, waving a hand at the chaos as if showcasing the newest model of barely functional disaster. A real postcard moment. Wish you were here, Mom, Mira Zane, wiping soot from her face and looking every bit like someone who had just wrestled a malfunctioning robot and won, gave him a dry look. I'm sure it'll be a hit on the interstellar travel blogs. Visit the Rust Bucket, where your nightmares get a promotion. Tina clambered out from beneath a panel, her hands smeared with grease that had probably been there since the last century. Look on the bright side. We might not have plumbing, but at least we're not dead. Speak for yourself, Rylan shot back. My dignity died somewhere between the exploding conduits and the improvised bioweapon. Mira snorted, her eyes flicking back to her tablet. Amazing how those two things tend to go hand in hand, isn't it? Bayan's voice crackled through the comms system, interrupting their banter with all the subtlety of a collapsing star. Hey, party planners, how's the cleanup coming along? Slow, Rylan replied, eyeing the mess with the enthusiasm of someone facing an all-you-can-eat buffet of tasks and no appetite. But hey, at least we're not blowing up. Yet, always a plus, Bayan agreed, a hint of relief in his voice. And the Vyerks, running with their tails between their legs, Jack said, grinning. Like they just realized they picked the wrong lunch table to mess with. Good, Bayan said. Let's just try to keep things running long enough to patch up the damage. I'd rather not spend the next month floating through space in a metal coffin. Hey, give us some credit, Tina interjected, rummaging through a toolkit that looked like it had been salvaged from a 20th century garage sale. We won't let us drift off until we've at least taped up the airlocks. Mira looked up, her face serious despite the glint of humor in her eyes. "We did good, though." "Against all odds, we pulled it off." Rylan nodded, feeling a rare swell of pride that he quickly squashed under a layer of sarcasm. "Yeah, well, never underestimate the power of desperation and a complete lack of other options." "Or duct tape," Jax added, waving a roll like it was the key to salvation. As they got back to work, the banter served as a lifeline, stitching together moments of levity amid the grind of repairs. Rylan found himself occasionally glancing at Mira, who was deep in her work, her focus an anchor in the chaos. He caught her eye, and she offered a small, weary smile. "Thinking of adding Savior of the Rust Bucket to your resume?" he asked, sidling over to where she was working on the genetic lab's ancient equipment. "I think I'll pass," she replied, her fingers deftly manipulating wires that had no earthly business working together. "But I might start charging for autographs." "Don't undersell yourself," Rylan said, gesturing at the tablet that had somehow become the hero of the Ior. "After all, it's not every day you save a station with a device that's older than dirt." Mira laughed, a sound that was almost lost amid the clatter of machinery. "True, but let's be honest, that was more luck than skill." "Luck's what keeps us alive out here," Rylan said, shrugging. "Skill just makes it look like we know what we're doing." "Fair point," Mira conceded, her smile fading as she turned serious. "We should probably start thinking about what comes next. The Vyerks might be retreating, but they won't stay away forever." Rylan nodded, the weight of her words settling heavily despite the levity of their earlier banter. "Yeah, we need to be ready. This little trick isn't going to work twice. Then we better make sure this place can at least limp through another fight," Mira said, her tone firm despite the exhaustion that shadowed her features. "Agreed," Rylan said. "So, what do you say we get this floating disaster back into shape? You fix the science, I'll fix the mechanics, and maybe, just maybe, we won't die a horrible death." "Sounds like a plan," Mira replied, her smile returning. "Although I was kind of looking forward to a quiet retirement as space debris." "Don't worry," Rylan said with a grin. "There's still time for that." As they worked, the camaraderie among the crew was palpable, a shared determination to overcome the odds. Jax and Tina tackled the power conduits, while Bayan coordinated efforts from the comms, his voice a steady presence amid the chaos. "Bayan," Jax said, adjusting a particularly stubborn wire with a grunt. "Any chance we can requisition some new parts from HQ?" "Only if you fancy waiting 3 months for delivery," Bayan replied dryly. "And that's if they don't get lost in transit." "You know how reliable space mail can be." Tina rolled her eyes, wiping her hands on her coveralls. "Looks like it's just us and the scrap heap then." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Rylan joked, though there was a thread of truth to his words. There was a certain satisfaction in cobbling together miracles from junk, a testament to human ingenuity or stubbornness. Possibly both. As the Iors wore on, the atmosphere in the station shifted from tense to something approaching normalcy. The whir of machines and the sharp tang of ozone became the backdrop to conversations that flowed like a meandering river. "Hey, Rylan," Jax called, his voice echoing across the cavernous space. "When do we get some R&R? I'm pretty sure we earned it." Rylan paused, considering. "Well, considering the Vyerks might come back and we're still holding this place together with hope and caffeine, I'd say right after never." "Always the optimist," Jax grinned, leaning against the repaired console. "One of these days you're going to surprise me and say something cheerful." Rylan shrugged, a crooked smile playing on his lips. "I make no promises." Tina wiped sweat from her brow, glancing at the now functional power grid with satisfaction. "At least we got this running," she said, gesturing with a wrench. "One step closer to not dying." "Always a good goal," Mira quipped, her eyes flicking between her tablet and the station's readouts. "And with any luck, we'll keep it that way." "Luck and duct tape," Rylan added with a nod. "The unsung heroes of the universe." Mira laughed softly, her gaze meeting his. "Well, if we're betting on luck, I'd say we're due for a win." "Let's hope," Rylan said, though the truth was he believed it. They'd face down the impossible and come out the other side. If that wasn't a win, he didn't know what was. As time marched on, the rust bucket slowly took on the semblance of a functioning station once more. The lights were steadier, the shakes less violent, and the air marginally less likely to turn into an impromptu vacuum. It was progress of a sort. "Okay, team," Rylan announced, clapping his hands to get their attention. "I'd say we've earned a break. Maybe even a real meal if the food dispenser isn't busy trying to kill us with cardboard stew." "Don't tease," Jack said, his stomach growling audibly. "You know how I feel about real food." Yeah, Ryland said with a chuckle. "But first, let's take a moment to appreciate not being space dust." The crew gathered in the common area, their weariness overshadowed by a sense of accomplishment. Bayan joined them via comms, his voice a tinny but welcome addition. "Cheers to surviving," Bayan said, raising an imaginary glass. "And to hopefully doing it again tomorrow." "Hear, hear," Mira echoed, her eyes bright despite the fatigue that tugged at her features. "And to the rust bucket," Tina added, patting the wall affectionately. "You ugly, ugly beast." Rylan leaned back, the tension in his shoulders easing as they shared a moment of quiet camaraderie. It wasn't much, but in space you took what you could get. "And don't forget," Rylan said, a sly grin tugging at his lips, "to whatever cosmic force decided to give us this insane winning streak. May it continue," Jack said, his voice a hopeful rumble. They sat in companionable silence, each lost in their thoughts yet bound by shared experience. The rust bucket was still a rust bucket, but it was their rust bucket, and that made all the difference. "So what's next?" Tina asked, breaking the quiet with the question that had been brewing beneath the surface. "We keep building," Rylan replied, his tone firm. "Fix what's broken, prepare for the worst, and hope for the best." "Ambitious," Mira said, her smile soft yet determined. "But I wouldn't have it any other way." As they continued to talk, the specter of the Vyark threat loomed in the background, a reminder that peace was fleeting and danger ever-present. But for now, they savored the moment, the victory, and the bonds forged in adversity. In the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about unity, resilience, and the irrepressible human spirit. And as long as they had that, they could face whatever the universe threw their way. "Hey, Rylan," Jack said, breaking into his thoughts. "Think we'll get a holiday named after us? Save the Rust Bucket Day has a nice ring to it." Rylan laughed, shaking his head. "Maybe, but only if it comes with a side of coffee and a working toilet." "I'll drink to that," Mira said, raising an imaginary cup with a twinkle in her eye. And with that they settled into the rhythm of repairs and routine, buoyed by laughter, sarcasm, and the unshakable certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Even in the darkest corners of space, where hope was scarce and danger a constant companion, they were survivors. Scrappy, sarcastic, and utterly unbreakable.